Locksports, but we're also the official chapter for TOOOL Georgia. If you don't know what TOOOL is, they're the open organization of lock pickers. They're a nationwide organization, but they also have a group in Europe. That's where it actually started from, and then came over here to America about 2013. So just a couple of years back, it really became kind of big. So we're going to use their slides, which it covers the basics of lock picking and how locks work internally and why we can bypass certain features that locks have to let us access them with tools instead of the keys. So I'm Rory, that's my wife Chrissy in the back. She's going to get some locks and some picks and kind of hand them out real quick so you guys can mess around with the locks while we're doing the presentation. And then we'll have some questions and answers, and then we'll have lots more locks that you guys can play with. So first off, there are rules to lock picking as a sport, what we call lock sport. They are, you don't pick someone else's locks unless you have permission from them. You don't just walk up someone's locks and pick them. You can get picked up for that. Police don't like it very much. And you shouldn't pick your locks if they're in use. So if you have a lock on your front door, you really shouldn't pick it unless you really don't plan on opening the door again, because you can break them, or if you're going to change it out anyway. So having said that, Georgia's laws do allow you to pick locks as a hobby, as a sport. Alabama does as well. Tennessee doesn't, so if you're going up north, they kind of have some issues. But if you're in Georgia, you're good. So there's three kinds of ways to open locks, and they basically start with lock picking. So lock picking is what we do. It's just the sport type stuff. It's learning how locks work on the inside, why they work the way they do. There's the quick and dirty, which is what criminals do, busting locks open. And then the third way is basically what spies would do. We don't talk about that. We don't go into a lot of using special tools to get into locks. Mostly what we do is learn about the mechanics of why the locks work and how we can defeat them. So lock picking is really easy to do, and that mainly has to do with the way that the locks are constructed. So starting with doorknobs, doorknobs are just like any other lock that you'll see. That's one of the biggest questions we get. People see padlocks on our table, and they say, do my doors work the same way? Yes, they do. The doorknobs, the padlocks, they all work the same way internally, just like deadbolts. So this is if you can imagine the front of the lock, this is what it would look like. The red thing falling down is the bottom pin on the inside. So if you were looking without the cover, you would see that there are three parts to the lock. There's the spring at the top, there's the blue pin, which is the top pin or the driver, and the bottom pin is the key pin. So if you didn't have a key and you just tried turning the lock, you see that the driver pin, the blue pin, binds up. So the lock cannot turn, it cannot open. But once you put a key in, it lifts that blue pin, the driver pin, up. And the key pin is what's pushing it up. And it pushes it out of the way so that the cylinder can turn. So if we were to turn the lock sideways and look at a cross section of the lock, this is what we would kind of see. We'd see that there are multiple pin stacks, each with a key pin, a driver pin, and a spring on top of it. So when the key is placed in, it lifts all of the key pins out of the way, and the driver pins are flush with the core, which allows the core to turn. Another couple of words to know: the gold part is called the core, and the bronze part around the edges is called the Bible. So when we use lock picks, we insert a tension tool, which is that bottom piece. We use that to kind of turn the lock a little bit. The pick we then use to lift the pins individually, finding what is called the binding pin. So you can see it's got kind of a yellow circle. It's the binding pin. When you find the binding pin, the pins will kind of click into place. You'll actually feel like a little bit of a click. So after you found the first binding pin, you would then make your way back and find all of the other binding pins. This will let you pick the lock once you've found all of the binding pins. There is no specific order. Manufacturers don't make locks to be picked, so there is no order when you're picking the locks. It's all because of their tolerances. When they drill holes, the holes aren't straight, so it allows us to turn or to add pressure to the core, and those pins start to bind. So here's some more about the manufacture of the locks. So in a perfect world, the holes will be drilled in the core perfectly in a line. And if you turned the key, all of the pins would, or if you turned the core, all the pins would bind up together, not letting you pick the lock. Now, the more expensive the locks there are, the better the manufacturing tolerances. They have certain millimeters off that they can drill when they're drilling the holes in the core. So the better the lock, the more expensive the lock, most likely you're going to have better tolerances and a harder time picking the lock. So in the real world, the holes look similar to this, where they're off. They've got pieces that are kind of drilled at an angle, so it's hard for the pin to be to bind all at the same time. This is a couple of pins. You can see they're kind of misshapen. They're just pieces of copper. They're not really they're not going to have a whole lot of use to them. They don't stand up to a whole lot of stress, so they're kind of malleable. They can be messed up. They can be broken pretty easily. So you can see in the real world, you can see how the line of the pins over here is very off. It's not centered. They're all off to the side. So that's what lets us pick the lock and lets the pins bind up. So if you were to look at the front of the lock while you were picking it, if you're just looking at the first pin and it was a binding pin, what you'll see is that the core turns and it binds against the pin, and it makes it kind of offset. And when we lift that bottom pin, that key pin, it just kind of sits on the edge of the core. So that's what you're doing every time you pick a pin in the lock. So you can also set multiple pins by lifting pins outside of the one you're actually touching, which you'll see here. So as he lifts this last pin, you'll see he actually lifts other pins around it. So now he's not actually set that third pin, but it's just out of the way a little bit. And when we do this, we can also do what's called oversetting a pin. So when it comes to oversetting, you're actually lifting another pin that is in the way, and it causes the bottom pin to get lifted up past what we call the shear line. That's the line between the core and the Bible. So that is called overlifting, that last pin. You see the key pin has been lifted past the shear line. What a lot of people think when they're first picking locks is that they have to lift all the pins to the very top of the keyway. And that's not really what you're doing. You're just lifting those bottom pins enough for the top pin to bind. So if you think you've got all the pins pushed up, then you've done too much. You need to let them drop back down. Just kind of push them up lightly. So there's also raking tools, which I think is what Chrissy gave you guys, the half diamonds. Is that what you put out, the half diamonds? Yeah. So raking is done kind of like, you kind of zip up the pins. What this does is it sets multiple pins at once, It's a very easy way to get to a lot of locks, especially the ones that we put out in front of you. Master padlocks are this way. Some really simple wafer locks are this way. You can just rake them with the pick and they'll just pop right open most of the time. So here's a demonstration of using a rake and what it looks like inside. So as you can see, he just kind of wiggles it in and out, lifting a little bit. You do kind of want to do a little bit of a lift motion while you're picking. That kind of helps to set those pins. Because you don't know what is inside of the lock. You don't know how those pins are, how long they are, how much pressure you're going to need to push them up. This is a quick and dirty way to get in. It's not the sport way, but it will get a lock open. A lot of locksmiths will try doing this first, breaking the lock real quick, using a lockpick gun to bump the key open or bump the lock open. And unfortunately, a lot of home deadbolts and doorknobs are susceptible to this. So the half diamond is the one that what you guys were given. That's the middle one. There's also other names for different tools. Here's lifting with the half diamond, because the half diamond doesn't have to be used as a rake. It can also be used as a single pin picking hook, because it has a little point on it. So you can also do what's called raking with it, which is where you just kind of rake it in and out of the lock. And of course, you can always lift all the pins up, which that's not really done that much. Lift using the back end of the tool. I think what they're trying to get here is that you can figure out how many pins are in the lock by using the back end, so that you can listen to the sound of the pins falling. Then you can know how many pins are in the lock, so you know how many pins you have to pick. So to turn the lock, you want to turn the lock clockwise. Most padlocks are going to open clockwise. There are a few that do open counterclockwise, but it's very, very rare. A lot of people suggest using your forefinger to push. That gives you a lot of range of motion. You can feel the tension tool as you're picking, because the tension tool will move a little as you're picking. So go through these pretty quick. So you don't have to use too much pressure on the tension tool itself. You just need a little bit, and you're just going to push. Basically, I say push until you feel the core start to turn a little, or you feel some resistance from the core. You don't need to be heavy-handed with the tension at all. I kind of went with this. Deadbolts and doorknobs turn left or right depending on if they're being locked or unlocked. Deadbolts, it just depends on how they're installed in the door. You kind of have to figure that out as you are, if you're picking a deadbolt in actual, being in the world of picking the lock. I don't think there's much else here. So we've got other locks. If you didn't manage to get that one open, we've got easier ones. We've got harder ones. So does anyone have any questions about the basics of lock picking? Any questions about anything else regarding lock picking, physical security? This is used a lot in pen testing. If you're going out doing actual pen testing at a site for someone, picking locks is something that you'll need to have. You'll have to have that knowledge so that you can go out and try to pick a lock if you come upon that situation where you don't have a key and you need to try to get into a building that someone has hired you to try to pen test and get into. Yes? So we have tools available to sell. We sell a little kit of tools. It's a 7-piece kit. It comes with 5 different picks, a couple of rakes, a couple of a couple of picks, single pin picks, and it comes with 2 tension tools. We also sell a little clear plastic or clear practice lock that you can see the pins inside of it. We get all of our tools from Southboard. They're down in Florida. They make all their own tools themselves. They punch everything themselves, clean them up. A lot of people like to make their own tools. The metal that's used in the tools is just a really thin piece of stainless steel. You can get that on the side of the road. The road cleaner bristles are the same pieces. They also are in windshield wiper blades. Inside of windshield wiper blades is a couple pieces of metal, and that's the same thickness, same width usually as that. So you could take a grinding tool, just grind them down or file them down, and make whatever style of pick that you want. A lot of people make their own tools based on what they want to do. So, but you can always purchase them as well.
How much do you sell the toolkits for?
The picks are $20 for the kit. Comes in a little leather case, and the locks are $10. So $30 for the kit, or you can buy them separately. And we do have plenty of them if you guys are interested. Any other questions before I wrap up? No?
Inside of a handcuff looks like.
Okay.
Shows how it ratchets. It's just a very small lever. So we teach people 2 ways of how to get into it. The first one is called shimming. And you'll always go from the opposite side that it ratchets. And you will essentially push it in there until you push down on the lever and it no longer will ratchet. The plastic's way too hard on this to do. But that's how you would shim, and it works a lot better on the actual pair. The other one is picking with a bobby pin, because that's essentially all you'd ever need. So you go up to the top of the keyhole, and you go straight in and turn towards the longest part, because that's where the ratchet's going to be. So you would turn, and that's essentially how easy it is to get out of the handcuff. That's about as quick and as fast as it takes. You are free to try any method you like.